Hello and welcome to the live stream. This is Kendra Little from Redgate's database advocate team. And I'm actually going to take off this headset because the echo is just freaking me out. What I want to do today is I want to show you a little bit about some of the cool new stuff that's been released recently. And we're calling it the hybrid model. Hybrid meaning that our good old friend, SQL source control, it's great for a lot of things, but occasionally you want to do something fancy. And you want to do something to be able to use something called migrations. But you don't want to use this in the old-fashioned way. You want to use this in a new way. You want to be able to really craft migrations as part of this, but you want to do them with SQL change automation. So the reason that I think this is a good idea, really good idea, is that Redgate SQL change automation product specializes in migration. So this is the product formerly known as ReadyRoll. And recently it's had a bunch of improvements, like it has an add-in for SQL Server Management Studio. Before it was only in Visual Studio. And you may notice that even in the add-in, there's all sorts of new stuff in here. So I'm going to show you what some of that new stuff is, because now it hooks up with SQL source control. So instead of going to this migrations tab and generating migrations using kind of a partial tool that was available in SQL source control, you can hook up SQL source control with SQL change automation and really get full featured proper migrations. And I'll show you what I mean by that. If you do, by the way, if you do have existing SQL source control migrations, they will still show up in here. So that's why it, in order to display the content on this page, it wanted me to choose a database over here on the left. That's because if you have existing migrations in here, it still wants you to be able to use them. But for this database, where I never used the older migrations feature in SSMS, I am encouraged to go do it the new way, which is more robust and better. So I want to walk you through a little workflow that I have set up here, and let's just deploy a new change in here. So right now I am in the master database there. And what I'm going to do here is clear this out. And this is a new machine that I've set up for demos. So I have committed the terrible presenter skill or a sin of I have not installed the Zoomit plugin. So let's actually Chaco install what is sysinternals. Let's see if I can remember the name of sysinternals. The package was not found within there. So let's do a quick search. We're veering off course slightly here. So we're going to look up Chocolatey and sysinternals. Who knows what horrible news is showing up there. We don't want that right now. We want the command to install the sysinternals package using the Chocolatey package manager. Chaco installs sysinternals. So let's see, why did it not find the package there? Chaco, that's not the correct link. My clipboard's not this is what happens when you go off script is I do want to allow it access to my clipboard. Chaco install sysinternals. I did something not right there. Let's see if I can get this right. Yeah, I have some sort of typo that I can't even identify. Sysinternals. Yeah, I actually still can. Oh, I spelled sci-internals. I missed an S. So, Chaco installs sysinternals, and now let's see if I can run Zoomit from there so that I can properly zoom for y'all. The Windows key doesn't want, there's all sorts of problems. This is an Azure, this is a VM in Azure DevOps in the cloud that I'm running from, by the way. So I'm like, what's going on here? Sysinternals. It doesn't even want to show them to me right now. So let's see if I can, maybe it added it to my path. Zoomit, it did add it to my path. Yes. So now I have that running, and now Now, all right. We got there. So I do love the chocolatey package manager for installing things. Sometimes I just need help spelling to make it all work. All right, so now I can actually do things like zoom in on a database and mark on it. Thank you, Zoom It. Love it. All right, so now let us go on with our demo. So I have a database named Demo Workflow that I'm working in, and you'll notice that I've already got a couple schemas with a couple tables in it, and I've got some T-SQL-T that I've been looking on. We'll see a little bit of that in our tour today. So let's just go ahead and do, let's just do a new table. So let's go ahead, and I did control in there. Between me and the cloud and the live stream, it took a sec for my remote session to catch up there. And it's been a while since I've actually, there's a way to hide the connection bar. Anyway, in any case, we are going to create a table, and we're going to name it, let's put it actually in, for reasons we'll talk about, let's put it in the B schema. So we're going to create a table named B, let's call it Do It Live, right? And we're just creating, this is really dumb schema. This one we can zoom this way. How many ways can we zoom? And then we'll just make this like a char 10, right? So we've created a table named Do It Live, my beautifully named table there. And in reality, we might do other changes, but we mostly just want to see the workflow today. So the idea is that, well, and it's not just an idea. This is what a lot of customers tell us. What a lot of customers tell us is we really like working in SQL source control. And we want people to work on SQL source control and just develop changes for a little bit until they're ready to release. And when they're ready to release, then we would like to look at the code and see if the code needs any changes. We like to do a code review at that point. But we don't want to create migration scripts all the time. Right? Maybe we're ready to ship every 2 days. Maybe we're ready to ship every day. Maybe we're ready to ship every 2 weeks. But whatever that interval is on, we want to make a bunch of changes and then deploy. We only want to really look at the code once we're ready to deploy. But we want to be able to iterate through things during the time. And my dog, if you can hear, my dog is very excited about this concept. It's the joy of doing it live, is you get to do it with your dog commenting. So, all right, I am in Git in Demo Workflow. And for the implementation I'm talking about, you don't have to do it this way, but a lot of people do like to work with pull requests so that as the code is being merged in, things like pull requests, pull requests help for code review, communication, and making sure that the right changes are happening. So we're going to include that in our demo. I'm going to do get status, and it'll just confirm I'm on the master branch, right? We already saw that back in SQL Source Control. It knows we're on the master branch there. So I'm going to go ahead and say, I want to check out a new branch. So checkout -B says I want to do a new branch, and I'm going to call this features. And we're going to call it new table, do it live. And now I've created a new branch and I've checked it out. In other words, I've switched to it. And Freya is really into this. Now, if I go back to SQL Source Control and I refresh right here, hey, it notices that I changed my branch. So now I'm in the feature branch, do it live. And you'll see that in my orchestrator. In this example, I'm using Azure DevOps as the orchestrator. You'll see that I have some automation built around this use of feature branches. So I'm going to go ahead and check this off, and we'll say creating a new table, do it live. And we'll go ahead and commit that change. And then we are going to go ahead and push that up to my repo. So I might make several changes like this in my branch, just because I've committed to this branch and pushed it upstream, I am using a private development database with Git, because since Git is a distributed model, it really lends itself to using your own copy of the development database. Since I have a local repo and, I could make a bunch of changes and commit them locally without actually pushing them to the central repo, it really makes sense to use Git with a dedicated development database. Not every source control system is distributed. Git is a distributed one. In any case, I've pushed this one up. It's still just in my feature branch. So I might work iteratively on this table. I might be like, oh, I actually want to do another commit and add another column and explain why I have now, added a different column to the do it live table, all before I get anyone to code review. But let's say that I am done right now. I'm going to go on up into Azure DevOps. And this is the repo that I have set up for this. If we go into the repo here, you'll notice that I have two folders at the outer level. I have a state folder. And this is where, as I work through SQL source control and commit things, they are in this state folder. If we go into my pull request here and we look at features, new table, do it live, and I create a pull request from this, so click on that create pull request button, it will help me see what files I've changed. And notice that the file that I've changed, all of my files in SQL source control are editing things that live under that state folder. SQL source control is a state-first way of managing code. And state-first means that it contains full object definitions for everything. Every time I commit a change, it commits the state of that object, the full definition of the table. So even if I was just adding a column to that table, it would still source control the whole definition of that table. And actually looking at this table, let's go ahead and push another change just so you see what happens when I do that. And I'm like, oh, because I've clicked on create pull request. We can close chocolatey now. Like I've clicked on create pull request there, but I haven't actually created. So I'm actually going to go back and we can leave that page without creating the pull request, right? I didn't actually want to create that yet. Let's say on this do it live table, I feel this strange guilt whenever I don't create a clustered index on a table. And I don't use the designer very often, but let's go ahead and use the designer. And I say I don't use it very often, not because it's bad to use the designer, but because I'm like, I'm not even, it is an identity column. We can't allow nulls. I'm not good at using the designer because I don't do it very often. Let's say set primary key there. And I'm like, how do I tell if it's clustered or not clustered? I don't even know. So let's go ahead and how do I script this to a new window? Generate change script. Let's do that. There we go. So this is and it is doing it as a clustered index. So I'm just going to say, yeah. Or actually, I don't want to script the change. I'm just going to, how do I apply it to the table? I'm so bad at using the built-in tools in SQL Server. I find this completely, can I just click save? I just clicked save and it did it. So the built-in designers in SQL Server, like, I think I'm a little spoiled by using SQL prompt, things like that. But anyway, I can review, by the way, what the change is when I check it in. So I'm using SQL source control still, right? I'm still working in that state-based fashion. It picks up, hey, you made a change to this. So on the left here is the database version. And on the right is the source control version. So the one in source control does not have the primary key clustered constraint, but I'm adding that in. So, oops. I forgot the CPK, the clustered primary key. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and commit that and then push it up to my repo. I can't bear to commit it without a clustered primary key. Don't want to get in the whole heaps discussion, but yeah, most of the time you don't want to use a heap in SQL Server. So, okay, I'm going to push that up to the remote repo as well. So now we can actually see that, like I can work in this branch for a while. I could get feedback from people. Even if I had the pull request open, right, I could still update the contents of my branch until I'm happy about it. So it says, by the way, you updated this just now. So let's go ahead and create that pull request as well. And even though I committed this before and, now I added a constraint, right, it's always storing the entire object definition, including indexes on it, constraints on it, that kind of thing, because that's what the state-based model does. So creating my pull request title, which is going to be creating do it live. Now, part of the benefits of pull requests, note that I have not added any reviewers in here. Not at all, right? I might want to add some. But one of the benefits of pull requests is that with most orchestrators, you can automate adding reviewers and you can set requirements around it. So as soon as I created this, notice that we have a little message that says the owners of schema B have been added as required reviewers for this table. And that's because this table is in schema B. So I might have a requirement where for certain objects, I want to have specific reviewers. In this case, I've set up the rules by reviewer. So I'll show you how this is set up. This is how it's set up in Azure DevOps. It'll be set up different in Octopus Deploy and different tools like, right? TeamCity will have its own way of doing this, but this is not a completely unusual type of thing for an orchestrator to do. If I look at my repo and I go to my branches and I look at the master branch, here in my master branches, all right, here is demo workflow. If I look here and I look at the branch policies, I can see how I've set up required reviewers. So I've got options I can set here. You might want to set minimum number of reviewers and things like that, but the automatic reviewers is happening down here. I can actually use path filters and say, based on this path filter, I want to add different reviewers. So the reviewers on the left, I've set up some groups that have members because, I might not want review to be dependent upon one person. I might want any person in the group to be able to review that, right? So I've said if we modify any files in schema A, I want to add schema A owners. Any files that are in schema B, I want to add schema B, and so on. And I can even say if it's in anything that's not schema A, not schema B, and not DBO, then add the other schema owner. So somebody is going to get added no matter what. I also have used path filters to automate builds. So I've said anything that gets checked in that's in that state folder, it's going to run this build. Anything that gets checked in that's in this migration folder is going to run this build. So I checked in something with SQL source control, which automatically checks everything into that state folder. So it's going to run the appropriate build for that every time a pull request is done. And this is part of the benefit of a pull request is you want to make sure that code builds properly before you check it into a made code line. In this case, I'm checking, hey, does my build succeed, right? And it automatically ran the build based on that policy. Let's resume properly here. So it made sure that the build succeeded, and now it's running some further automation for me. I have this set up to automatically clone a database and then deploy to it for every pull request that runs. And of course, it will only do that if the build actually succeeds because it is deploying the result of that build. So a code reviewer, in this case, I'll always have a code reviewer from the owners of the right schemas who need to approve it. And also those reviewers can look at this automation and say, oh, were you actually, not only did the build succeed, but were you actually able to create an environment and deploy to it? And I can actually go look at that environment. So this deployment is happening here. And I have it actually deploying to this SQL server that's on the exact same instance that I'm on here. So what's my pull request number? I just have it. You can customize this. I have it using the pull request number in the database name. I bet I'm on 137, but we can double check. My pull request is, if I just go back here, I should be able to find it. Yeah, it's 137. I can tell from the title bar there. So pull request 137, they can say, let's go ahead and actually, once the deployment succeeds, let's actually look at that database. I mean, we can see that there's the do it live table, right? So we can actually see there it is. And, it has the primary key on it that we added to. So this actually gives a rich environment for reviewers. And of course, if you wanted to have this in a pipeline that also, if you wanted that automation to also deploy application level components for that as well, so that the reviewer could actually use the application and the database together, you can do that as well, of course. Now but wait, there's even more. So I do want to show you one thing that is part of the build for this is actually also, it's not just running a build, it's also running some tests. So if I go over to, let's just go to pipelines here. This is the pipeline that it ran, right? So, and we can even see creating Do It Live. It was triggered by pull request automation. It was pull request 137 on the last run. If I edit this, I have a couple different tasks defined in here. And I have not only a build task, but I also have a test task. And what my test is doing, it's running. So it is, first of all, the type of task is the SQL change automation build task, but you get to pick the operation. And this operation is testing the build artifact using tsql-t tests. Right, so I run it after the build. First, I run a proper build who's doing the operation of build a source control project. And now I have one testing a build artifact. And I have told this that I want it to run a specified class of tests called X schema. What is X schema? Well, let's actually look. It's easier to look in SQL test in Management Studio. So in the demo workflow database, if I expand this out, here are SQL test built-in SQL cop tests. I went ahead and just for convenience for demo created and you can create as many test classes as you want, right? So I do like the idea of leaving the built-in SQL cop ones by themselves and then putting all of my own in appropriate classes as well. So then I know what type they are and everything. So I've created a class named cross schema. And what this is checking for is, am I introducing new dependencies across schemas? This may or may not be a concern for you, right? This is just an example test of things you might want to look for depending on your needs. So one need I've heard from multiple customers is we are working towards a microservices way of working, and we are trying to get there. And different people will sometimes do this in different ways. There's multiple methodologies you can use. One of the methodologies is to increase the use of different schemas within your initial database. So that requires very minimal data movement because you're still working in the same database. But you can start to understand what are my dependencies across different schemas. And if you have a goal of eventually moving those schemas out into their own databases, you want to only decrease the number of dependencies between the databases. You don't want to introduce new references across them. So I have one test that looks for expressions, things like stored procedures that are dependent or functions that are dependent or things like that, and one that looks for foreign keys that go across them. And I have a static data table in them. Let's go ahead and run the tests in this class. And we can see, if they pass or not. So this is what is being run by in the build, right? So I can use SQL tests to check them locally myself if I want to anytime. But also, even if I forget, it's going to run as part of that automated build, and it's going to check, did you introduce new dependencies? And if you want to take a look at my not very beautiful code, it gets the job done. What it's doing is it's checking, hey, what are the dependencies in the database? And then it's looking at the static data table I have. That's a table that we don't ever want to deploy it anywhere. It never gets deployed to production, but we just have it in dev and tests that records what are our dependencies in this database. So that is how that works. So you'll see notice that you don't see that table. Notice that you don't see that table in here, right? But let's go ahead and look at demo workflow, which is my dev database, right? Notice the tsql-t schema isn't getting deployed, but it is in my development database. And in the tsql-t schema, I've got that's where I have my static data table. So these two actually. Those are the two static data ones. So in my development database, I can just show you what those tables look like. And I just inserted the current status I have. Let's see, if I do a SQL prompt, SF, select star, SSF, is that it? There we go. I'm just This one is a simple one. I use select star more often than I want to admit. And I'm trying to train myself. This is a snippet that if you do SSF, it helps you do select star from really fast. So that's one that I'm just learning to use. I'm learning to embrace just for, not for production code, but just for demo. You know, sometimes it's useful to do select star from just for things like this. So where it's expected cross schema FK dependencies. So here's just, you know, it's saying, oh, I already know this is an existing dependency. So look for new ones that aren't in this one. And if they exist, it'll print out what they are. This is an example of a type of test you could craft in T-SQL-T just using existing SQL, and you can run it as part of that automated build. So on my build there, I didn't introduce a new problem with that. So my build actually passed. So if I go back now to my pull request, here is creating Do It Live. And I have things set so that I can approve my own. You can set things so that people can't approve their own pull requests. But since I sometimes demo this alone, right, I have given myself the privilege to include this. I do really like that it shows you, by the way, the Schema B owner approval was done by Kendra Little, right? So it's very obvious that I approved my own pull request. And we're going to go ahead and complete that and merge the change in. So we can iterate like this frequently. And if there was a conflict, by the way, if Stata is really, really great at making it easy to compare conflicts, like if someone else had also created a table named Do It Live, right? I would have found out about that when I created the pull request and would have been told to resolve it. So that's really good and easy. There's ways we can do that in migrations too, but it's just nice and simple working with SQL source control. Right? And that's a lot of why people like working with SQL source control is it's nice and simple. So back on my developer machine, I'm going to check out master, right? Because my pull request is done. I am done in that branch. So I'm going to say get check out master. And let's go ahead. And if we pull now, I completed that pull request and my change merged in. So now if I do get pull, notice, hey, the master branch now has the Do It Live table. Right, so that's all done. And let's say that we're ready to deploy now. You know, maybe other people have done changes too. Maybe it's time where, and by deploy, I mean we're ready to start deploying to things outside of our dev databases, right? So we work in SQL Source Control with our dev database. If we're working with a shared dev database, right, we're all working with that, but we're working in source control. If we're working with dedicated dev databases, we're each working in our own. But at a certain point, we're ready to start promoting this towards production. Now, often for database changes, this involves going to a QA environment, right? We often go to other environments first. So when I'm ready to start at first going to QA, the way I deploy to QA, I really want to make sure that I'm testing the exact way I'm going to deploy to production. So I want to cut migration scripts and test those in every single environment, right? I don't want to just like cut a migration script right before I go to production because I want to make sure my deployments are repeatable. So as soon as I'm ready to get out of that development environment thing and start promoting it to upper environments, if I'm using the hybrid solution, I mean, if I just want to use SQL source control and I want it to automatically determine how to execute the changes for me, I could deploy. I could say, oh, I just want to use SQL source control and I don't want this hybrid model, right? So if you want to keep things really simple and you never want to customize the code, you could still do that. I'm not saying you can't. But if you have an environment with very high availability needs, for example, and you need to make sure that every statement is optimized that executes against that environment. Or maybe you just have really large tables in that environment and you're like, yeah, we need to craft these statements carefully and make sure that we aren't creating an index against a very large table in one step, and I really want to review the code and ensure that every time. Or maybe you frequently want to make changes to data, right? Maybe you need to fairly often do things like say, I'm going to take a column from this table and I'm going to move it to another table, and I need to do that without losing the data. So I want to do things like, okay, first I want to add the column to the other table and make it nullable. and then I want to move the data over in small batches if it's a large table, then I want to do a validation step, and then I want to cut over. If you want to do something custom like that fairly often, a state-based model isn't really going to suit your needs because you need to edit the T-SQL. You need to tell it exactly what you want to do. So if you have any of those cases, or even if you just want to selectively pick some of these changes out, right? Maybe 6 people have made changes and I have them all in master, but I only want to ship a few changes out of that. Then having an extra layer, having the hybrid model enables that convenience. So you're able to start simply. And the way to start simply is just to start with SQL source control. But then when you're ready to start saying, okay, we need to be a little more, we need to handcraft some of this stuff because of either high availability situations or the need to do more complex changes, then you can adapt from that into the hybrid model. Because what the hybrid model lets you do is lets you hook up SQL source control with SQL change automation. So to show that, I'm going to go into SQL change automation. And the way these work together on SQL change automation, this is in the plugin in Management Studio. And this specific feature has just been introduced, and it's only in the SQL Server Management Studio plugin. So you can't do this in SQL change automation in Visual Studio at this point. I'm not sure what the plans are on that front. I actually haven't even asked because it just showed up in SQL Server Management Studio. What if I click on this state button here? This is what the new feature, how you put it in place. You can say that you want the source for your development changes in SQL Change Automation to be a SQL source control project. We also have this nice new option here where you can quickly create a new clone of a database. So you can only pick one option on this screen. We have 2 new options on this screen. The one we are demoing in this session is the hybrid model, in which you take the changes committed to SQL source control and you can craft migration scripts off of them. So I have my project set up with this option here, and this, right, the folder in my Get repo for state is the source of that. So it just knows, hey, here's where your state-based changes live. If I click refresh here, it will look at my SQL source control project for what's new. And for me, I did do multiple commits, but the only actual change I made was adding the new table in that has, an alter table cluster primary key in there, right? So SQL change automation sees that this is a new table, and it's not yet in source control, and I can generate migration scripts. If I had multiple changes here, I could select the changes I wanted to create migration scripts for. And that's what I mean of, sometimes folks get in this situation of like, we thought we wanted to release that, but we actually don't. Now, how do we back it out of the state-based without actually losing the changes? Or how do we change the order we want to do them in? The ability to select here gives you some additional control over that, which is really nice. So I'm going to go ahead and click Generate Migrations there. And it is now generating the code for that migration, and it places that into the 1.0.1 folder with this name. It did not misspell my name. I am Kendra in my dev environments, even though my name is Kendra. That is my cave girl name. So it's using the name I told it I have. To see and edit the code in that, I can either click on this migration script here and open it up, or let's say I didn't do that now, but I want to do it later. I can always go to the migrations tab here and look at the migrations that I've previously created here. I can even show them in File Explorer. If I want to look at them on the file system, I totally can. I also can rename them. You can completely, customize your migration scripts if you want. And I could make this 002, creating do it live table. I don't have to leave my name on the end, but, I can leave my name on the end if I want. I hate putting spaces in names, so I'm going to correct that because I just hate spaces in file names, but I still do it sometimes. And of course, I can also edit the code. This is what we're here for. So I could say Control-K, Control-Y. Let's say I want some, I could do everything from adding comments on this to if I did have some data changes I wanted to add, like, oh, actually, after creating dbo.doItLive, I want to go ahead and seed it with some data that's just in production. I could put that in the migration script as well. Now that data I've seeded, it's only going to be deployed with the migration scripts. Like, it's not in my dev environment, but as long as I understand how that works, I can behave responsibly. I have the freedom, right? I can do what I need to do. So I just reformatted that. I'm gonna go ahead and save that. I also have the ability, after I change my migration scripts, I can verify them. And this is very good because I want to make sure that I've actually, I could change things. Let's just show it. It wouldn't be the first time I've done it. I could accidentally do things where I'm just like, I make a little goof and I don't necessarily realize it. And then, yeah, it tells me before I have to go too much farther. So I can go back and figure out what my error was. It does, by the way. It tells me it's on line 9, right? So if I have a long script, it will still tell me where it is. But I can go ahead and fix that. Let's save that change. And now I can re-verify. And yes, hopefully it's fine. Preliminary, yes. All right, cool. Another cool new thing in here is this version control tab. So this is hot off the presses. You will notice that there is a little blue preview button there. Version control has now been added into the SQL change automation in SSMS plugin. This was a big request, and it's been in Visual Studio's had this for a long time. But we are, shipping this plugin and then improving it over time. So the version control wasn't added in the initial release, but it's just come in. And we can see now that since I last committed in this, we've had a couple of different files change. Now, the files that have changed, my .SQL proj file has changed. This has been modified. And that's because my .SQL proj file now knows that I have created a new migration script, because your .SQL proj file has to track what are all the migration scripts in there. So it has been modified. I have a new table that has been added, and this table has not only the migration script I created, but also there is an offline schema model. In the background, SQL change automation keeps track of the schema of things, so it modified that as well. So it's just giving me, just like I had done get status or something like that, it's like, hey, if you're gonna commit, these are the files that you have created migrations for yet. These are the files that have been modified in your recent migration scripts that have not yet been committed to source control. So I'm going to go ahead and add a commit message here. Created do it live. And let's go ahead and commit that. Commit was successful. And now if I'm ready, I can go ahead and push my migration script up to the remote repo. Now, I have just realized that I have not followed the workflow that I intended to follow. So let's see what happens here. I am totally doing it live. I actually have well, I'm using this for the first time. That's one thing. I actually have a policy set up on my Azure DevOps repo that says, by the way, you cannot commit and push from master. And yet I have committed a change to the master branch, but we can fix this. This is the true joy of doing it live. So we're going to do get status. I am on the branch master, and this wouldn't be an issue if I didn't have this policy in place, right? Like, I put this in policy in place on purpose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do get checkout -b, because it's a new branch, and let's go ahead and call it pre-release. Like, if I'm working in this fashion with a hybrid model and I want to use, it still can be very valuable to use pull requests with your migrations, because you often do want, hey, could someone take a look at this? Let's make sure that it builds. Let's make sure that we can deploy to an environment. And with a lot of orchestrators, pull requests is the way to do that. So we're going to call this the do it live release. All right, so I'm checking out a new branch there. I'm going to go ahead and merge. Okay, so I created that from master. So my new branch has all of the commits that I've done. Let's see. If I go ahead and come here and let's do pull. And I think I haven't actually set up version control in here as the other thing that I've done. Okay, we know we're on pre-release Do It Live. I don't have a remote. So there is, by the way, this is a completely accurate command right now. For this branch, I have just created this branch. There is no remote for it. Let's go ahead and push it. Yeah, it's not so happy about the push. I think I haven't configured this correctly because literally I just installed this today. So let's go ahead and do get status here. I'm on pre-release Do It Live. Let's do get ref log. And we'll do Q to get out of there. So get ref log. You know, it has this commit for created Do It Live in there. So let's do get push. It will tell me you do not have a remote. You do not have an upstream branch, but I'm going to go ahead and just copy the sample code here for creating the remote branch. And I'm going to go ahead and push it up there. All right, cool. That's what I get for being like, oh, I'll demo something new without testing it on a Friday afternoon to make sure that I have it configured correctly. So now if I go ahead and push in there, it's got it successful. I have some setup thing I had wrong on here. So if I do get status right now, I have now successfully pushed that up to the remote there. So, all right, when I come into Azure DevOps here and I say on my pull request tab, it says, by the way, you just updated pre-release Do It Live right now. And again, the only reason I have to work in branches and do pull requests is because I set it up requiring that way, right? You can set this up differently. It's just a common thing to want to go ahead and use pull request automation for this, because even if I don't want to have a reviewer on this, I don't know about you, but I actually do want automated build and test running against it personally, because it just means that if I forget to test something locally, which I am inevitably going to do, I can use this automation to go ahead and do it, and it just makes my life easier. So I'm going to go ahead and create my pull request. And I don't know if you recall, back on that branch policies page, I had paths set up to make different builds run for different folders. In this pull request for Do It Live, the build that it's running is one for the migration. So it is running demo workflow migrations CI, because in my migrations folder, I want it to run a build for SQL change automation that checks the migration stuff. So I have a build set up for that, and it is able to now build that. So if I want to have different tests run for my migrations, like there's something else I want to look for in there, I totally can. I've got a lot of flexibility for it. So it's now building the code for the migrations, and I can also put, you know, if I want different automation to test deployments based on this, I can totally do that as well. So when I am ready to deploy, I can go ahead and craft the statements for that. If I want to use pull requests for that, I can. I don't have to. You know, it's all about how you set up that workflow. So my build has succeeded. It is now finalizing the job and reporting that status back. So let's go back to my pull request there. Here's the Do It Live pull request. And I believe I didn't have additional automation set up on this one. So my build has succeeded, and now it's done. So I'm going to self-approve again. And notice, you know, I didn't set up those rules for approvers on this one. So this one is really just, you know, like it doesn't have those groups involved because I only set that up for state. I have the flexibility to set it up for whatever I want since I'm using different folders for the state and the migrations. But I do have them all in the same repo. By the way, if you prefer to have the state and migrations in different repos, you can, right? I'm going to complete this pull request before I forget, complete the merge. But if you would prefer, for whatever reason, you could even use different source control systems for them if you want. I think it is more straightforward to just have, you know, two folders in your same repo, but it's up to you as to how you configure that. It does work if you want them in the same repo. Now, one last change. One last demo, I guess. Let's say for the migrations, I am happy with them, and I am now ready to do a release for my migrations. I have set up here, you might say, well, how do you actually release it? At least in Azure DevOps, right? going to work differently in different orchestrators. In Azure DevOps, I have my releases set up so that if I create a new release in a different sort of logical folder, and let's show you what I mean. So off of master, I can see if I go into master, by the way, I can, look at the history and see, okay, merging do it live was the last thing that happened in there, right? But now I actually want to go ahead and do a release. The way I have this set up, you can just say, hey, I want to create a new branch off of master, and I'm going to name this releases, and then I'm going to name it release 002. And if I want to link work items, I totally can, but I'm just going to go ahead and create a release. If I look in release 002, I am releasing via migrations. So in my migrations folder here, we'll see that, I have everything up to 002 creating do it live table _ Kendra. And if I had more, I would have more. But the way I've set up my pipelines is I have a release pipeline that is going to, first I'm running a build. Before I get too excited, I have a build set up so that it says, this migrations build is also going to, this is the one that was run by my pull request for the migrations, but I also have it set up so that when it sees anything go into the releases folder, it automatically runs a build. And then once this completes, because we do want a fresh build for that, containing everything we have. After that completes, I have a release pipeline that's going to pick up from this. And this release pipeline says, it has a filter on it. So the filter says, I only pick up changes when it's a build branch from releases, right? So only things in that folder. It's waiting for the builds to complete because that's the artifact that comes in here. So we're going to make sure we have a nice fresh build. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to essentially create a QA environment on the fly and deploy to it. We're going to go ahead and use Redgate SQL clone task to create a clone. And we're going to name this, with the source branch name. You can name it however you want. We're going to create a release artifact against it. And then we're going to go ahead and deploy to it. If you want to use an existing QA environment, of course you can. You don't have to create a fresh QA environment. You would have to make sure it was ready and in the proper state, like had previous migrations applied to it and was waiting for the, the next set of changes. We've kind of done that dynamically with SQL clone here, but you can do it whatever way you want. But essentially here it goes. It's kicked in after the build ran, and let's go ahead and just watch it as it goes through. It's now creating, it already created the clone of our database. Our database, they could be quite large. I think the one we're using here is just a gig. But because of the cloning technology it's using, it's creating a very lightweight writable clone. It only took 8 seconds to do that gig database, and it'll also scale nicely for others. And now it's creating the release artifact, and then it's deploying it so that we can actually do testing on it. So I have everything just, come into this SQL instance here. See if I can get it to refresh. And it's release 002. Right, so this is the one that's getting deployed to. And if we go in here and look at the migration log table, so I'll do new query. SSF, was that snippet right? Select star from. We want migration log. We can see that we have a baseline that's been applied and then programmable objects. There are 3 here. What stage are we at right now? It's still creating the release artifact. So this is, it's waiting for output from the agent. This is likely related to me either not, let's see what it's really related to. It's been working on this a while, and I'm like, either I didn't set this job up properly, the pipeline up, because this is really new, right? This is me really kicking the tires on this. Oh, if I refresh, it's all done. I was like, it's either because I'm doing too much on this one little VM in Azure, or it's because I didn't set this up properly. It's always fun to find out, right? So let's see what we're looking at here. This is release. Let's refresh up here. Come on, you can do it. This is release 002. And if I am looking in the migration log table, I don't think I set this up properly. I think I missed something when I set this up. So perform deploy from resources. Let's take a look here. Release artifact deployed successfully. Release artifacts release 3. All right, hang on. Let's go to the release artifacts. It's always fun when you first set up an environment and you're like, did I check my work properly? So in Windows, I have a DB automation folder. In migrations here. Yeah, it's release 3. I would like to allow the blocked content. Thank you. Yeah, I have done this in a way that, let's look at my script. So release artifacts are really useful because you can look at, hey, exactly what script did you run? And I've done this in a way that it actually didn't pick up the changes right. Like notice post-deployment steps here. You know, here is the actual, here's the end of the pre-deployment, because I can do things like run pre-deployment scripts is what they're called. And I can check those in. But the body of my code here, you know, it's like you have zero. Notice how it says 0 changes here? It's telling me there are 0 changes in this deployment. So I haven't hooked up something in my pipeline right. My pipeline succeeded. I shouldn't have closed that. Let's go to dev.azure.com. And let's take a look at my release pipeline. Workflow, pipelines, releases. And on this release pipeline here, yeah, it's not release 2, it's release 3. This is release 002. So what in the world did I do? Okay. Well, those two things, my numbering has confused myself. So release 3 in this screen, this is just simply the third release that was created. I ran release 1 twice. Release 3 is actually release 002. So I should be looking at this. The database should be named release 002. All right. So demo workflow migration CI is our input here. I want the latest one. The artifact is set properly there. And now I am creating the clone with the build source branch name on the right server. I am creating a release artifact against it. And then I am deploying to it. Now, at the time I created my release artifact, that actually knew that something was wrong, right? That is the one that was like, there are 0 changes. So if I look at my release artifact for release 3, and I go into my project, okay. So we're learning a little bit more. Notice that my project only has that 1.0.0 baseline script in it. Let's see, did I do something? Let's go back. Let's check one really simple thing. Okay, I did complete my pull request. So here on completing my pull request, do it live. This was from my pre-release branch. That's the error there. All right, hang on. So notice that my commit's in there. Look at my files. Okay, we do have 002. We did update our SQL proj, right? So these files got checked into master, and now when I go to my repo and I look at in the migrations folder and I look in master, right? 1.0.1 is in there. So let's look at my build pipeline. Demo workflow migration CI. I don't know how deeply I've actually dug in. So this appears to be where I went wrong. Let's take a look. So there was an error. So this is an interesting one because the build, if I look at past runs, notice that the stages is checked off. I only see the error when I actually go in there. So it is saying, and this totally is my bad, like I didn't set this up right. I ran this the first time and it output a NuGet package with DW-M that just stands for demo workflow migrations 1.0. And it was fine the first time because there was no file with that name. But then I didn't tell it to increment that in the pipeline. So it just tried to overwrite it. And so it wasn't able to overwrite it. So what actually got picked up by the later pipeline was the original file. Anyway, here's how to fix this in your pipeline. This is a good reason to run things multiple times. Check things on the second run, not the first run. Let's edit the pipeline. This is why I like to do things live. You can share in my experience of watching Kendra not do it right the first time. I learned the most from not doing things right. So here's the little checkbox that I failed to check off. If you say, hey, by the way, I want to append the build ID to this, because some folks might not want to do this. Some people might actually want to do something that cleans that file off and then reuse it. I do want to increment the file name. So I want to check that off. We're going to go ahead and save this. And then I'm going to say fixed setting now appending build ID to NuGet package. Yeah. So let's go ahead and save that. And now in my pipeline, it's easy to rerun this if I want. I want to go ahead and run this pipeline. So we're going to run our migrations pipeline. And then we're just going to rerun our release pipeline. I will double check. Let's double check in my release pipeline. This is the migrations branch filter one. When I am running that SQL clone task, I want to make sure, yes, you can control this as well. If the clone already exists, I do want it, if I rerun this job, I want it to go ahead and recreate the environment and then run everything. If you don't want that to happen, if you don't want it to be overwritten, you don't have to check that off. But I do want that to be an option, so that's already checked there. So this build is running right now, and now that I have fixed that setting, hopefully it'll be able to actually output a file there. Let's see what part of the build that we're on. This one, I am not running tests after this, so it really just has to do the build on this one. But it does have to use my little machine that's doing it all, including doing this demo. It's not a very beefy Azure VM that I'm using. If we look at this, if we take a look at the task manager, let's see how many cores do we have even. I don't even know. We've got 2 cores that are working as hard as they can to do this stuff for us. So looks like our build has succeeded there. And now our release pipeline. Now that my build pipeline has succeeded, this, of course, would happen automatically when I created a new release branch. So I could just recreate that release branch. I could delete it and recreate it if I wanted it to happen with the automation. But I can always just, if I want, go ahead and say, okay, I want to create a release here. So let's go ahead and create it. It will just use the most recent, build artifact. So here we are on release 4 this time. Releases in progress. Choo, choo, choo. And by the way I noticed something had gone wrong before, I don't know if I fully explained this. This migration log table, and it is going to drop the database that I was looking at here, right? So management studio is going to get a little mad because I told it to create this database. When you're deploying with migrations, it has a log of here's all of the migrations that have been applied here. And so what I saw in here was we have applied the 001 baseline script, but that migration I just added that creates the table, do it live, it's not in this list. It wasn't deployed to, and these deployments were not today, right? So anytime you want to check, okay, what has been deployed to this database with migrations, you can just check, or with SQL change automation, really, you can just check the migration log table. So that's how I knew, I have something not set up here because the change from my release has not been deployed to this. I could also, of course, look at Object Explorer and be like, do you have the do it live table? But I could just tell from the migration log table that, no, you don't have the do it live table. So now it is working on the release. I believe that it is on the, can we see it live? I would like to, well, maybe I click logs. So an agent is ready for the job. It's working on the 2 core. Yeah. My tiny little VM. Your build server might be a little more robust than my server, which is my build server and my dev server and my demo server, right? But this does show that you can do a prototype with pretty minimal resources as well, right? That's part of what we're showing here, is that if you want to put a prototype together, it doesn't have to be too beefy a machine. If you do want it to perform well, you may want to give it a slightly nicer machine. But, sometimes you want to do a prototype on a shoestring. Sometimes if you're me. And now our job has succeeded. So let's check this out again. Let's refresh our database list here. And let's do a new query window. And I could have probably reused it. But I like to use my SSF filter. This is so cool, by the way. The SQL prompt team recently did this. Notice that now migration log is at the top of my selection list. It remembers recent selections you've made and helps prioritize those to the top so that if you're doing, because often we do, and I just arrowed down there. The other table I'd done recently. But it's really helpful because it often is, we all often are working with similar objects for a while there too. All right, hang on. Looking at my migration log table. Okay, I should have actually checked. What have I done now? If I look at my pipeline here on the migrations pipeline, I want to actually go into that pipeline. Okay, I got 2 warnings, but there was no error. And now if I go into my release artifacts, and I go to release 4, I go to changes.html and allow black content. Okay, there are changes here. There's the do it live change, right? So this in my build artifact is have these changes. And there were more changes in my programmable objects as well that I had not deployed yet to the database I'm deploying to. So when you deploy a migrations release, it'll be like, hey, what are all the things you have applied yet? And I'll apply everything you haven't applied. And I had more outstanding changes in there. The release artifact here is really useful because you may want to review a release for production deployments. You may want to take a look at the release artifact before you click the go button, and you can set that up as well to make sure that you understand exactly, okay, this is what we expect. Is it what's there? So you can kind of dip your toe into that too. Let's take a look at my databases here. So it's the changes now that I fixed my NuGet package error. Oh, that's what happened. Okay. So since and this is an error in my pipeline setup that I need to just create a task to do this. When the automation runs, the way I have this set up, I am determining, and I'll show you what I need to fix here. So this is just an error in the logic that I should correct. In my release pipeline, connection with live updates has been terminated. Well, all right, that sounds severe, Azure DevOps. I don't know what you mean by that, but I think it just means my screen isn't refreshing. I think I just am supposed to like Control R or something. I don't use this browser very often. I don't know how it works. It doesn't, I don't know. Anyway, this is not pertinent. Let's just take a look at the pipeline. So this is the thing I should correct, and it's PowerShell, because no one should trust me to write PowerShell. So the way that I have this working now is that the name of the database it creates, oh, it's not actually PowerShell in this one, but I should probably fix it using PowerShell. I have it using the build's source branch name for naming the database. And that is just a built-in variable in Azure DevOps. The problem with using build.sourceBranchName is that, so I like it when the release runs automatically, the source branch name comes through clearly, like it's release 002 or whatever, or release, mushroom or whatever I want to name it. It doesn't matter. You can name it however you want. But then if I manually rerun the build and then manually rerun this pipeline, when I manually ran the build pipeline, the source branch name just shows up as master, right? So I actually, for this pipeline, since this pipeline is just for releases, I actually should just come up with a better variable that I am using to name the database so that no matter how I kick it off, it consistently uses a name. So that's just a problem with how I've set up my pipeline that I hadn't really thought about until now, so I should change that around. But essentially, it used a different name because I manually kicked it off this time, so it didn't replace release 002. So if I want to do SSF, oh, I actually do want to select star from, yes, hit the correct key. And I want to do migration log to actually see the one that just deployed. It just deployed to the migrations_master table. And now if I look, there we go. Doing it live when you've just set up all your pipelines and also haven't really thought about how you name your databases, it does actually add extra fun to this. So here we can see that migration script that I just added there too. So I hope that you have enjoyed this tour of Kendra working out her new demo environment, where I have been actually having quite a lot of fun setting up the pipelines for this. The foundation of this is we are using SQL source control and checking things into a state-based folder. And then when we are ready to deploy, we are using SQL change automation to generate incremental migrations, giving us a customizable and repeatable set of deployment scripts where we know exactly what's going to deploy, and we can do things like handle data movement however we want in that deployment script. So that's the essential concept of this. If you are a very happy SQL source control user and you don't want to change, you don't have to. But if there are things you want to do, where it are either regarding the order of changes, like cherry picking out certain changes, or customizing those scripts, or having more control over the T-SQL that's executed, then this kind of workflow might be useful for you. So it's been lots of fun hanging out and working with this. And I'm going to go ahead and call it a week. It's a Friday afternoon here, so I'm going to go ahead and have a weekend. My name's Kendra from Redgate's Advocate team. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you again in another live stream soon. Bye, folks.